I'm Diane Brennan. Welcome to our final meeting of 2022. It's amazing that this year has gone by so quickly. This is our third December of meetings. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Elena.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen in just a moment with a presentation. As you all know from the message that was sent out earlier, I'm going to talk a little bit about burnout, or a lot about burnout. What you'll see and hear is a modified presentation that I delivered earlier this year at the annual meeting of CUPA HR, the College and University Professional Association for Human Resources. That presentation was very much aimed for a higher ed HR audience, but really the content is applicable to any audience in higher education, really. And while it's a hard topic, it's an important topic, especially as we close out a calendar year and head into the holiday closure period. For those that have been at the University of Arizona for some time, the closure period is really, I think, the only time I really see people slowing down at the university. That said, there are plenty who continue to work throughout the closure and really have to save that downtime for an alternate period. And so it's a good reminder to all of us to really take advantage, those that can, to take advantage of that time to really unplug, at the risk of sounding cliche, but really get away from some of the work. Okay, so let's jump right into this. Really what I want to do today is talk to all of you, really have it be a dialogue. So while I have just over a dozen slides, I do encourage you to interrupt if you have a question or thought, comment, or reaction. But I do want to talk about increasing our understanding of burnout, as well as, and perhaps more importantly, talking about where you might be able to make some changes for yourself, for your team, or both immediately when we think about how we approach our work. And then consider how collaborations across our campus community can help you in your work, in your team's work, particularly in managing workloads. What we have found in HR is that campus collaborations have really strengthened the work product for us and also helped us better manage our respective workloads. We have a great culture here at the University of Arizona of active collaboration, in part because we are a very large, complex organization, and you need to work together to solve problems. And so it's great to be able to build on that as part of creating overall better well-being and reducing, maybe even eliminating workplace burnout. So I'll begin with this quote: "If you're going through hell, keep going." I was never good at history, for the record. I am a big fan of The Crown, which is a series on Netflix for those who might be familiar. And I believe it's season 2, where Winston Churchill is a big part of the story. And it was great to get more familiar with him that way, an easy way, a casual way, though it isn't entirely factually accurate. But this quote was shared with me many times, particularly in 2020 and going into 2021. And if any of you were part of this meeting in 2020, as we closed out that year, I shared a little bit of that in our conversation. And as I said, it was shared with me, including by some senior leaders. And the intent, I think, was to really give me hope, to share that people had confidence in what I was doing, and to keep going in spite of some of the challenges. Many of you will recall we were managing pay reductions and furloughs during that time, while everyone was experiencing an increasing amount of disruption in both their personal and their professional lives. And HR was the face of the pay reductions and furloughs, and it wasn't an easy time at all. What I've learned since then is that really what this was, it was a message about going differently, leading differently. If I was going to survive, if I was to continue to do well, I had to really lead differently. And so this is a bit of my story of going differently, but also some of the things that we've learned within the HR organization. And going differently really is about knowing yourself. If you don't know yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of yourself or anybody else, and that includes your teams. And that's not surprising, right? If someone is looking to get healthier, for instance, they're going to evaluate their own habits, eating habits, physical activity habits, et cetera. Leading with courage also includes saying no. And I think this is particularly hard for any of us that are doing mission-driven work. So that includes higher education. We, throw everything into our work. We want to support those of us, those around us, to ensure they're doing everything they can, and we're doing everything we can to ensure we're successful on delivering our mission. Our mission here, in terms of educating students, as well as solving, the world's biggest problems with respect to our research endeavors. And also, going differently is really about looking at well-being and advancing well-being as a contributor to greater engagement, greater productivity, and also being much more inclusive. And I'll say a little bit about all of these as we go through. But I want to start with really looking at what burnout is. And burnout is obviously not something new, and certainly something that was getting a lot of attention before the pandemic. And I had not looked at this definition of workout particularly until I was connected to Jennifer Moss. She's the author of The Burnout Epidemic, which came out, I believe, last year, 2021. She was working on that book before the pandemic and stopped working on it to really be able to include some of her observations from, different working styles and operations forced by the pandemic. And Jennifer Moss, in case you don't know her, she is a journalist based out of Canada who's done a lot of writing, for instance, for the Harvard Business Review. And so if you consider this definition, burnout is a problem. It's a syndrome. And what catches my attention here is that it's chronic workplace stress that's not managed, not successfully managed. And I also want to draw your attention to these three characteristics here, these three dimensions as it's framed. Feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. So not just simply feeling tired at the end of a workday, but always feeling tired. Increased mental distance from one's job, feelings of negativism or cynicism related to your job or your job duties. And this one in particular, reduced professional efficacy, really gets my attention. When I think about the word efficacy, I tend to think about political efficacy, right? So you as a citizen, how connected do you feel to the institutions that are charged with ensuring that we are in a thriving society? Do you feel like, for instance, that your vote matters? Do you feel like you can have an impact? And when you think about our work here in higher education, so much of us are not just attracted to the mission, but we're also feeling like we're having a positive impact. So when you're not feeling like you're having a positive impact anymore, that's not a good thing. And it's certainly going to affect your work. And so now I want to talk a little bit about some of my own realizations with respect to, not seeing the signs of burnout in myself, and not, more importantly, not modeling the kinds of behaviors that I was expecting of my team and other leaders. Many of you might remember that in 2021, there was a message that went out to this group. It was right before the start of the academic year, if I'm recalling correctly. And for many of us, it was the first time we were returning to pre-pandemic working conditions. Some people continued to work on campus 5 days a week throughout the pandemic. Some are still working in a hybrid fashion, but for many, it really was the first time we were coming back to something that resembled pre-pandemic working conditions. And there was a lot of distress. I don't know if you recall all of this. I think of many different examples, one of which was that people still didn't feel really safe. For instance, parents of young children who weren't yet eligible to be vaccinated had concerns about coming back into the workplace. And so there's a great deal of stress. And I had sent out a message to supervisors really asking them to not just take care of themselves, but to take care of their teams, to really take time to ask people how they were doing and recognize that people were still managing a lot of disruption in their lives and a lot of stress and fear still. And so here are some of the behaviors that you might not recognize when you think about, or when we think about burnout. Confusing exhaustion with having a strong work ethic. When we think about a work ethic, at least for me, and when I think about, the influences in my life, people either have a work ethic or they don't have one, is how I thought about it for a long time. And it's really not that simple. an unrelenting fear of disappointing others. This is especially true in this environment, University of Arizona, higher education. A lot of what brings leaders to successful leadership positions is really having worked hard to not disappoint people. And one of the most difficult lessons of leadership, I think, is really learning that you might have to disappoint people in the course of doing your work, fulfilling your goals, etc. And then no longer observing boundaries, and maybe boundaries that you've worked really hard to establish. Boundaries are not the same for every individual. You have to find what works for you, but it's important to have them and to not lose sight of them in spite of a particular crisis moment or a particularly heavy workload period. I always recall when I talk about boundaries, a former colleague, Pam Jones. Those of you who have been at the university for a while might remember her. It's been several years since she retired from the university, but she would often say to me, Elena, it might be time for you to put up your walls. And that's really, it's not limited to HR professionals, but at that time, she was really focusing on our work within HR. We can sometimes be advising a very sensitive situation, and it's hard not to personalize it. It's hard not to go home and think about it. And so she would say that to me, knowing that I'm a visual person, and it would help me try to create some distance between what I might be feeling with that particular situation and how to move forward from it. So we'll talk about each of these a little bit right now. Now, Gary Blau is not someone I've met, but what was interesting in just reading about burnout is that he's heavily cited through a lot of the interesting work recently on burnout. And so he talks about there's a healthy work ethic and there's an unhealthy work ethic. And what's key here is that when you begin to believe that any downtime, anytime that you're not working, that it's bad. And if that continues, you are going to get to this point where you are burning yourself out. It also can hold you back professionally. Perfectionism can be demotivating. You can get to a point where you set this unreasonable threshold for satisfaction when it's basically impossible for you to ever feel satisfied with your own work or a particular work product, such that you get to a point that you're not even sure what good looks like. And that might lead to unhappiness, and unhappiness then leads to lack of productivity or declined productivity. It also can distance you from your colleagues. If you are a perfectionist, you might be intimidating to your colleagues. You might be considered an overthinker, where you spend just an excessive amount of time on every detail that people are not going to want to work with you. And then I think this one is key. It can actually reduce your effectiveness. And what that really is about is that you might fear making a mistake so much that you're not taking any risks, which can hurt your creativity. And we do learn from our mistakes. In fact, that's where some of the greatest growth occurs. And so by not taking any risks, by not maybe taking a different approach, being creative in however you're tackling a problem, you might not be finding the best solution, and you might not be growing as a result. It's also incredibly unhealthy. So this institution, York St. John University, I had actually not heard of, but I came across an article that referenced their two researchers at this institution. They had looked at 20 years of research and really kind of captured that, pretty consistent pattern that burnout really is tied to depression, anxiety, and in some cases even death. So it's not healthy for us to keep these kinds of habits. Now, talking about boundaries. Why is it that we might lose sight of boundaries in our work? And in part, it's because work has become so much of our identity, not a new phenomenon, of course. But think about like social gatherings. If we think about the holidays coming up. Oh, I see a hand up. I'm sorry if it's been up for a while. Erin.
No, I just put it up. So are there strategies that they're giving us? Maybe I'm jumping ahead and you're going to get to it in your slides, that somebody who is, a perfectionist or who holds themselves to this high standard, can use to let themselves off the hook?
Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about that coming ahead, mainly reflecting on some of what I've done. And so I would encourage you to ask the question again if you feel like we're not covering exactly where you'd like to go. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks, Erin. And there will be 2 opportunities. We're coming up to one here soon for the group to consider a couple of questions, either by unmuting as you just did, Erin, or by putting some contributions in chat. We are going to keep it to the whole group. So again, why do we lose sight of boundaries? If you think about the holidays coming up, and even receptions that have already taken place, gatherings with individuals, particularly outside of the university setting, it's not unusual as you meet new people that you are talking about the work that you do. It's very much tied to your identity. We often talk about, faculty, for instance, that, a faculty position is not simply a job, but it is very much a life. I think that extends to more than just faculty. And I would imagine a lot of the staff here, I agree with that. When you are doing mission-driven work, it's really a part of who you are. It might be tied directly to your values. So it's very hard to have that separation. It's not just how we get our bills paid, but in fact, a part of who we are. It's also much harder for our brains, for us physically to say no. We want connection, we want approval. And so it's much easier to say yes than it actually is to say no. So we are wired, as they say, to make it harder for us to observe and maintain boundaries. And then what does it look like when we're not paying attention to these boundaries? Well, we're not taking any time away from work. And very specifically here, I mean, just knowing when to end your day, when to take a break before you revisit things. I mean, I'm sure there are many people here in the room that after you go home, you are revisiting your email account, or you're working on a particular project that you didn't have time to get to during the day. And so not allowing for sufficient breaks doesn't allow us to maintain our boundaries. And then we don't take care of ourselves mentally or physically. One of the things that I had done for myself when the pandemic started was I was trying to learn tennis. No easy feat for someone of my age to suddenly pick up that sport. But it was the only thing that I was doing that really got me away from thinking about work, mainly because you're trying to remember about 100 different tips that your coach is giving you while you're playing. And so you really can't think about anything else. And that was something that I really stopped earlier this year, and in part because it was increasingly harder to get it, to plan for it, and then I just let it slip away. So with that, we are going to take a pause. I'm going to take a breath, and I want to ask this group to consider one or both of these questions at the same time, and just share with us what you've learned or observed about burnout since the pandemic here in your work at the university. And if possible, how have you or others around you tried to address it?
I'll start. I'm remembering back to as we first went, from the pandemic into our homes, from the U of A offices or locations. I was someone who, prior to coming into the university, I had my own office because I worked from home a lot in the work that I was doing, but never as much as what happened in that first year of the pandemic. I think it became the norm to just go get a cup of coffee, go in, and then not leave until late, it'd be late because there was so much going on. And it's hard to stop that. But that is what's draining. And I see Joe has, back-to-back Zoom meetings with no break. What else do we have a lot of comments coming in now. Yeah.
Just on that, one of the other things that, just mentioning Jennifer Ross, one of the things she talks about that she's observed is, as a result of the pandemic back in 2020, we went into this crisis mode. And an observation that she's made is some of us have continued to work in that crisis mode. Everything is urgent. And we haven't some of us haven't found a way to step out of operating as though everything is a crisis.
Mhm.
Somehow we have to keep up the speed, the momentum, the pace that we had in place at that time.
One of the things I think we've seen, or I've seen, and in myself as well as in others, is we are more stressed. We are more, and it's evident because people are tired, and so there's a shorter, someone who doesn't necessarily say what, or have more of an animation in how they're working may not, we see actions or reactions that are out of the norm for that person. And so the more we can take a breath, stop, reassess, try to listen, the better we'll all be.
Absolutely.
Benefits of flex work. The line between workspace and home space and working hours has blurred. I know I close my office door at home if I'm at home and leave. And if I know I'm going to be in the office, what I've started to do is leave my computer here as I come in multiple days rather than take it home. And you could still look at your phone, but I'm trying to stop that too.
If I may, I think one thing too, for me as a supervisor that I sort of try to be mindful of is avoiding overworking our top performers or higher achievers. We tend to really give them more work because they are stellar performers and because they want to help and they want to, achieve success in their career, they'll say yes. So being mindful, I think, as a supervisor too, of when maybe give a project to someone else instead of always tapping on the same person for a project can be very helpful and also help others grow.
Nice.
That's such a good point, ND. I think too often the same individuals are called upon for good reason, because of their talents. But I would encourage us all to think about where others might have opportunities to contribute. Maybe they don't have the background or expertise, but this could be a growth opportunity for them. Or who are some of the voices we don't usually hear from, and how might they be able to contribute? So good points.
I have a quick comment to make, please. Also, as a result of the pandemic, when we think of all those relatives, friends, etc., that we lost with the pandemic, there's almost like a guilt feeling that remains that we have to do and we have to push because we have to be so grateful that we're alive and we have everything still and we're healthy, etc. So that guilt kind of pushes us to keep going and going and going.
That's such an important point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, as I've been scanning these, Elena, I think lots of good insights into taking care of or checking in with direct reports with others. Important to check in with yourself, notice these things as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's interesting, some of the habits, but one thing that I have observed, I serve on 2 national boards right now, and in one, there have been changes to some of our meeting protocols to absolutely include time in the middle of any meeting to just check in on each other. And it literally is this moment just to ask people how they're doing. And there's still lots of awkward pauses, but I think it does give people some breathing space to sometimes share that they are feeling overloaded or in fact feeling great, and they share a positive story or some success. Overall, again, creates a little bit more engagement within the group. So there were a series of aha moments for me. I didn't mention earlier, but had wanted to. That one was even just engaging with my own team, and particularly my leadership team here in HR. When your leadership team, sort of points out in a loving, caring way some of your own bad habits, like you're asking them to take time off, but they're not seeing you take time off. I think that was a real humbling moment for me. Another one, many of you may know Steve Holland. He retired after a long career here at the university, over 40 years of dedicated service. And I was not able to make his retirement reception, probably because I was going to a meeting. And I wanted to make sure I connected with him afterward, and we had coffee and we spent the most of our conversation really talking about what movies he was watching and recommending to me, and really kept the conversation light. At some point, we did transition to talking about the university and his own observations of HR. And, he had been very complimentary of me. And then at some point, asked me if he could share an observation. And his observation was to me that I was doing both my old job and my new job. And that was not going to serve anyone. And did so in a very direct, but again, direct, candid, but also very caring, coming from a place of compassion. For those that don't know me, I've been in HR here for 10 years, and prior to this role served in the deputy role. And in the transition to the CHRO role, really had not done enough to really transition some of the responsibilities that I had to others within my team and allow them to really grow and be an active part of shaping the vision. And so that was part of what happened after meeting with Steve. And so I just wanted to recognize him. And I think I saw Herb Wagner earlier. So just a shout out to risk management and that team. So let's go back to some of the strategies. I think the question that was raised earlier. So an improved, strong work ethic does begin with you. And this is a group of leaders. And so you're really in the position to define very consciously, have a deliberate conversation about what is a strong work ethic for you, what is it for your team, and what is it for the unit, depending on what's most appropriate. And I think this has to be a very, very deliberate conversation in order to consider different perspectives outside of your own. Some of what I realized really formed my opinion of a work ethic. I am the daughter of immigrants to the United States and grew up in a community dominated by immigrants from different parts of the world. And so much of my childhood, I remember just, you have to work really hard to prove yourself. And it's a privilege to be here, and you demonstrate your gratitude to that privilege by working really hard. And that doesn't really allow for a lot of consideration of how there might be a physical or mental impact to you. So certainly I think in talking about a work ethic, you have to think about what that means for you, but also very consciously asking your team what it means for them. And then as a collective kind of deciding what it is that you all want. How do you accomplish your goals, and do so in a way that respects people's different ideas of a strong work ethic. Strengthening existing partnerships and where you want new partnerships. I had mentioned earlier that campus collaborations are so important in our everyday work. We always approach problem solving by bringing different entities together, in part because this is such a large, complex place, and you can't solve a problem unilaterally just within one area. You really do have to engage others just to get the information that you need. But there's opportunity, I think, to grow those partnerships, to think about where we might share workloads with other areas of campus. And I'll share more about that later. And then obviously knowing where to say no. So much in HR, particularly with the pandemic, we were in many ways enjoying a new kind of visibility, which helped us in terms of helping people understand the scope of what we do. But a lot of it also included trying to solve many problems that we had never previously encountered. And I know this isn't unique to HR, but there was a lot coming our way. And what I was identifying is that we weren't saying no to things. And in that time, we really couldn't. But I would encourage everyone to consider, where is it that you might be able to say no, where you can still have a contribution, but not take on all the responsibility and accountability.
Elena, there are a few comments.
I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the chat.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to, along that saying no, I think I've seen kind of a thread with people appreciating that we're here talking about burnout, that it's probably, one person says, probably the first presentation that acknowledges the burnout across campus, but feeling that a lot of the problem is not perfectionism or saying yes, but that it's a constant addition to workload from people they can't say no to, and many teams being understaffed for years. So yeah, what occurred to me, and I understand that feeling or that sentiment, yet at the same time, I'd say sometimes you could say, if someone's putting something else on you that you think, is this my job or is it someone else's? And if it's your job or your role, then to really think about, what am I doing that maybe I can stop doing, or that we should move or shift to someone else, or even just stopping for a moment and say, let's think about this together and what the impact would be.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I will say I have appreciated, I think in forums that I've spoken to before, I think one of the more recent ones was the cohort of Academic Leadership Institute. People did bring up workloads. And I think we are talking about that more as a community. It certainly was happening before the pandemic. I've been here long enough to see the series of budget cuts year after year. As staff, for instance, leave the institution, many are not replaced. As people retire, those individuals are not replaced. And what's happened too often is that the workloads are simply distributed to the staff that stay behind. And that's a huge concern, particularly stay behind was maybe not the best way to frame that, but for those that remain at the University of Arizona, and that's not sustainable, not from my perspective at all, and has been a lot of the feedback that I've shared with other members of the executive leadership team, particularly in this current labor market, where the staff in higher education in particular have more options than they've ever had before. And for individuals residing in Tucson, they don't even have to leave Tucson and have access to a lot of other industries and employers. And so getting a hold of the workload is absolutely critical. With that, I would just say, ensure that your leaders are aware. It may be that many of you have exhaustively tried to communicate that up to your organizations, but do share it. More often than not, I've encountered senior leaders who have not been made aware of some of the workload concerns. And there are a lot of creative solutions, even opportunities to hire staffing, to secure additional budget, to hire additional staffing. There's also opportunities, perhaps more than we recognize, to actually say no, to stop doing some work in order to alleviate people's time. So I think communicate that as much as possible, and certainly lean on us in HR to help you maybe frame that to your leadership and hopefully get you the resources that you need.
I know there's a lot of conversation too, I'm noticing, about our culture. And, you know, when we use that word, I try to remind myself I'm part of that culture, right? Each one of us on this call, especially as a leader in the we're all leaders in the organization. And yeah, we have leaders above us as well, but we create a culture too. And you're right. Like, we've had, in some ways, culture that tells us to bear down and get the job done. And we have that opportunity to transform that. With our leaders and leading up, as Elena said, and checking in, right? So when we think about bear down, it's not intended to be the everyday, right? You can't bear down every day because then that's not, your energy is depleted, right? The rest is part of building the capacity to do that when the time is needed. And so sometimes, I know for the practical piece Elena's talking about, I frame things that, you're asking me to do X. Here's kind of the options, right? Y won't get done. It won't get done with the same quality, or here's the consequence to the people, right? And laying those out. But we are all part of that culture and have that opportunity to help shift it, even if it's in small ways. So just acknowledging that sometimes it's easier said than done, but thinking about even our phrasing, and how can we start to transform our phrasing around that as well. So I just wanted to throw out that we're all part of that culture.
The other thing, Elena, just as you were continuing, there's a few threads on how challenging it is to take a vacation.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you leave, then you come back to it's, you know, a kind of a punishment or disaster with emails. So, yeah.
And we are not good at it here at the University of Arizona. I'm sure I've shared it with this audience before, but among the 3 institutions governed by ABOR, the Arizona Board of Regents, I think the University of Arizona holds the record for the most forfeited vacation hours. Nothing to be proud of, but I do think that is something we have to work on. I've gone as far as sharing some of that data with the president, along with Lisa Rolney, and we've actually even talked about doing some kind of promotional campaign. That may not be the right language, but really talking about concrete ways to not just allow people to take vacation, but to take more than maybe a day or a few days at a time, but allowing people to take a week, 2 weeks at a time, if possible. And some of you may have heard about efforts, particularly in the private sector, to incentivize people to take 2-week vacations, even with like a cash bonus at the end of it. So I think those are some of the creative solutions we have to explore. I mean, we got to get to workload issues maybe before that. Just being conscious of, oh, I'm sorry, did I interrupt
I
somebody?
didn't raise my hand, but I just wanted to make a comment about the vacation too, that I think we all need to acknowledge and we deal with, is that we often in departments and divisions, we don't have depth. So we have that person that handles those job duties that no one else knows really how to step up and do. And so that becomes, I think, a problem for many of us when we're gone, because again, we are at a level where we have to keep everything moving. I mean, if we leave for too long, things just come to a halt and cause such a downward trickle that it becomes worse. And if coming back to that mess or those 100, emails that you have. And so I don't particularly see a great way right now to even deal with the problem that way, because it really requires to have somebody that stands behind the person going on vacation that can really step in to do some of that work that somebody has to do.
Yeah. I think it's great. I think I think you're absolutely right in articulating one of the many challenges across a lot of our units. I would dare even say the majority of our units, as we've not replaced staffing, increasingly we're dependent on one person to be the expert on an area or several areas. And so when they're not there, it creates different challenges, right? I think it'd be great. We have opportunities to showcase where people have tried to manage this and maybe trying to learn from each other. No, not all units are created equal. We have over 400 units. We have some that are much better resourced than others. But I think to the extent we can share good practices with each other is important. One thing we've tried to do in HR, we were much more of a siloed organization before. We're large in terms of our scope of responsibility, and we have very different kinds of expertise within here. But really trying to create as much as possible situations where others can step in, even though it's not their area of expertise. So it doesn't totally eliminate the need to follow up with someone who might be gone, but really just trying to reduce that dependency on one particular person. I'm just going to run through the next few slides a little bit quickly. I won't talk about everything here, but we have found great success here in HR, and some of it might be unique to what we provide for campus, but to work directly with some campus partners. I have to particularly acknowledge university initiatives and the work that we've done, particularly with family-friendly benefits and expanding parental leave. There's remarkable expertise there and really kind of a different approach to challenges than we have here in HR, and bringing those two sets of expertise together have really done well, not just for us, but for our campus community. I also want to give a shout out to UAir. We've had higher than average turnover in HR in the past year. That is exactly what's happening across higher education. HR is one of the areas experiencing particularly high turnover. IT, I think, is the top area. And I remember Rodney reaching out to me directly and asking what his team could do to really support some of the transitions we were seeing, particularly in our comp team. So I think examining campus partnerships and where sharing workload isn't exactly the best way to frame it, but how you can reimagine how some of the work is done. There's a lot of opportunity, maybe more than we realize there. I'll just say really quickly here, and I think this goes to some of the comments shared before, we did some reorganizing in 2021 in HR. Some of it goes back to the comments I had shared earlier, where I was trying to do 2 jobs at one point. But really, as part of any restructuring, as part of any employment changes, we do ask ourselves in HR, and I would encourage others to do the same, where are there opportunities for people to grow? I think too often we become restrictive about who can do what, and do they have a very particular background to do something when it comes to serving on a committee, for instance. And when I say younger professionals here, I don't mean young in age, I really mean just maybe young in expertise in HR. And that is a commitment that we've made to our team here, that we're providing everything possible to for people in terms of opportunities to grow. And that goes back to creating the kind of work environment we want that is healthy and allows people to honor their boundaries. Apologies for rushing, but I want to keep the good conversation going with the time that we have remaining. With that, I'll pause and just pose two other questions to the group, or really at this point, anything that anybody else wants to share. Just where have you maybe experienced some success, or where you've observed success in trying to reduce burnout? And then maybe how have you been able to sustain that?
I think one thing that I've tried to encourage with my team is creating a space where they can share openly with me about their workload or what's going on. And so we can talk about support services if it's something going on, or we can say, do we need to adjust this timeline? Do we need to say no to a project? So creating a space safe downward where those conversations can happen, and then saying, okay, maybe these are things that we got to let go.
Thanks, Joe.
We've had a couple comments here. Christina said she gets in early and stays late, but when I'm done for the day, I'm done. I shut down or shut off. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess a question, if I can ask a follow-up question to Christina. Are you coming on site mostly? Are you doing hybrid? Just curious.
I'll speak because I don't like to not speak. I hate to type. I am by choice on campus every day because I work harder, not smarter, Elena, at home. So I am by choice on campus. So I come in, I try to get in before 8, and then I stay till pretty much whenever I'm done. I mean, usually it goes till around 5:30 or so. Sometimes I take lunch, sometimes I don't take lunch. So it's like it all evens out at the end of the week. But once I'm done, I shut off completely because I just go home and I hang out with my family or do whatever needs to get done and then start again the next day.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing. The reason I'm curious is I come to the office 5 days a week because for me, that is healthier than working from home, which doesn't mean that I don't support those who do want to work from home. I like the flexibility, but I think Christina had said you work smarter when you're coming to the office, right? I think I personally am challenged to kind of turn things off if I'm at home. So that was why I was curious to hear that.
Meetings. I saw a comment about all the meetings. I think it is not unusual, but we've gotten, it's not, I've worked in other organizations and where meetings were rampant, but we seem to be more so here. And then with having the back-to-backs, I think somebody mentioned with Zoom, it's tiring. Somebody put that in as well, the fatigue. So figuring out what's the best way. It may be there needs to be a meeting, but maybe there doesn't. Maybe there's a different way to manage through something, though not just email, because that then is another drain. But having that dialogue to be able to think about it.
I know recent hires that we've had, individuals who have come from the private sector in particular, who have come to work here, have commented that they're struck by how many meetings we have, and not just how many meetings we have, how long they are and how many people attend them. And so that's definitely a lot of the advice that's out there. When you are scheduling a meeting, if you're the meeting organizer, being really conscious about whether or not you need everyone that's there. And then if you're invited to the meeting, even asking yourself, do I need to be there? Can this be accomplished without me there? And I don't know that we have so much of that thoughtful process as we put meetings together. It's at least for me, more focused on, do I have every voice represented that I need to have represented here? And I don't know that there's enough careful consideration. Can I just follow up with this person in a quick email as opposed to asking them to sit in a Zoom for an hour or sit in a conference room for an hour?
Yeah, a few folks have put in messages about the emails and kind of the continuous emails while they're out, or emails coming out before they leave and feeling like they have to get it done. So thinking about what could you do? Can you clarify or, talk to your, whoever it is that you're working with, your supervisor, your team, to see what's our priority here, and start to, because that's a shift in actually asking. I was with a group the other day where the comment of we were told we have to ensure this, or people have said, you have to give me 100% guarantee this will be done. People say that, but don't necessarily. Well, sometimes we take it as it's an absolute, but it's worth clarifying, because I've seen too many times where over the course of my career where it's a misinterpretation. It might actually be true in this case, but I was in a meeting, and some of you have told this to years ago with a group that I worked with, and the CEO sat down and wrote something down, and everybody assumed it was a direction for them. And when we went to, and they all wrote something down, and when we went to break, when I asked him what he wrote, he didn't want to tell me, but then he did. He wrote, "Pick up bread and milk on the way home." And when we told the team about that, they were shocked. It was the first time they realized everything that comes out of their boss's mouth wasn't in order. And they were working themselves into a frenzy. And it was the first time he realized, oh, I better watch, what I say there, or ask, did everybody take that the same way? Check in. And many people here have been saying, check in.
I think the check-ins, I don't know that there's such a thing as too much. I think when people share their concerns about their supervisors or their leaders, it's that there isn't enough checking in at all. And I think it's been one of the bigger learning moments here since the pandemic, is that it's important to have those connections about things other than work, to have those dialogues and talk about something that's not work, but really just kind of checking in overall and allowing people space and time to be able to share maybe what's on their mind, which could be about work or not. I have a couple more quotes, and then I'm anxious to stop sharing in case there's any other questions. So the first person, so I had the quote from Winston Churchill, an individual who sent me, there were many individuals who sent me that quote, which is interesting all by itself. But one individual who had sent it to me also sent me this during the same time frame. And I really love this one. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think what I've read about PowerPoint presentations is that if you are attentively listening, you are likely to retain maybe no more than 35% of the content that was presented to you. But you are likely to remember maybe, what was prompted in your thinking, what kind of self-reflection might have resulted from the content that was presented to you. And so I think this is important. Another thing that I'll add here, another author that I've recently been acquainted with, Sarah Ross, she has a book called Dear Work, Something Has to Change, which is a little cheeky, funny, but she talks about her own research to examine what people are looking for in their leaders. And one of the things she argues is that people aren't looking for their supervisors, for their leaders to have all the answers. They're actually looking for people who are empathetic, who are self-aware, and who care, who have values, etc. And then I'm a big fan of West Side Story and Rita Moreno. I'm able to get up and dust myself off and keep moving forward. I'm very stubborn. And I think leading takes an enormous amount of courage. And I think we're strong leaders when we're able to make mistakes, acknowledge them, take accountability for them, and keep going. I think we inspire our teams to do the same. And more importantly, to speak honestly with us and feel safe in the space doing so. So that is it.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you. I think one thing I was gonna add, and I apologize, I'm going to forget. I don't want to get wrong the name of the individual who said this. I think workload is really the conversation about workload and the stress that in particular staff, but it goes to faculty as well, that people are feeling is noted. I think any opportunity that I've given to name what I think the top challenge is, and it's the sustainability of our workforce. Something has to give, if you will. Like we do have to make some changes, and there are some good things that, the pandemic obviously was this tragic. It continues to be this tragic episode, right, in our human history. I have lost people that I've cared about as a result of it, but it also has inspired a lot of good change, and I think it's incumbent upon us to continue to do so. And so I would encourage people to share their stories of what's working and not working within their environments, including or specifically with us in HR, because we do have the opportunity to voice that to others. And we're in a unique position where we can do so very safely and suggest changes as part of it. And I'll stop talking there.
Thanks, Elena. And I appreciate people are putting in their comments here. This is a question we've asked the last 2 years. So reflecting on your role as a leader in one word, though you could enter more than one, how would you describe 2022? And so we can see overwhelming and stressful and challenging, or, the bigger the word, the more comments are coming in with that. And then to just piggyback on what Elena said too, to share your, make sure you don't hold that feeling of burnout alone. Know that there's resources here. You could reach out to us in HR, to your senior HR partner, if there's a challenge that you want to talk through. Remember also, we have our employee assistance program. That's what those programs are for, and it's a good resource. But feel free to reach out to us as well. So in 2020, let's see, it was stressful, challenging, were the top two, and then flexible, exhausting, learning, and 2021. So we're still feeling challenged, here's overworked, exhausting, overwhelming, our last one. And then reflecting on your role as a leader in one word. What will you bring forward into 2023? What are you hoping to carry forward, or even forward from today? Just thinking about where you're at and where you want to be. Letting go of perfection. Yeah, that's a lifelong process. It's worth recognizing that we all have a bit of that, maybe some of us more than others, but being able to look at it, what am I holding on to, or what's getting in our way is really important. It's a strength to look. Well, I think we are at our time, but any final thoughts?
Diane, I've just been scanning the chat, and I really appreciate how people have shared just what's working for them. I think that's helpful. And I think the other part of it, just based on my quick scan, is that we do need to be talking about this a lot more, going back to the sustainability of our workforce. Part of it is really recognizing what we're doing well and what we're not doing well with respect to taking care of people. One of the things that I'm very excited about, again, going back to, some of the gifts, if you will, from the pandemic, is really kind of looking at what your employer, what your organization is responsible for in terms of creating an environment that you're successful in. It sort of transcends the workplace boundaries and goes into how we're taking care of you as humans all together. And while higher education typically is a slower place for change, I think with the competition we're facing with other industries, we're going to have to act much more quickly. And so that in terms of conversations happening nationally, this is very much there. So I think as we share with each other what's working, what's not working, what are my boundaries? That was also something I saw in the chat, what boundaries people have found that works for them. If we share more and more of that, particularly with our teams, we begin to model that for the rest of the organization, and it becomes much more normal to say, I won't take your call if you call me between 7 and 9 p.m. Even just as simply as that. So thanks.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I took us past time.
No, thank you, Elena. Yeah, you remind me of it's okay. That's a way of saying no, but in a respectful way that helps people understand what the parameters are or what your boundaries are. And we forget that we can do that. And this is really, really good to have you all here and to have your contributions. We will look forward to seeing you in the new year. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Happy holidays.